Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's Khalil again. We got another fighting game topic to go over. This one's been causing quite a lot of discourse, particularly in the realm of Tekken, because it applies to Tekken more than probably any other fighting game right now. So I figured, as someone that has been a coach, continues to be a coach, I would kind of speak on this as it's an interesting topic, and I think like a lot of people are correct, and there are a lot of people that are incorrect, and some of those people are the same people. Like there are people that are both correct and incorrect at the same time, and so we're just gonna go over some things. So, from my understanding, this mostly started with this tweet from Yagami. For those of you who don't know, Yagami is very strong Tekken player, top of the top, really good, right? He made a tweet saying that he hopes that coaching will be banned for Tekken World Tour. And then he goes on to say, fighting games are meant to test who can execute and quickly adapt. Having someone looking calmly from the outside come up and give the adaptations midset is cheating and invalidates a big part of competitive fighting games. So I understand what he's getting at here. However, let's just address everything. That way we don't miss anything. Cheating is not the right word here, right? Because cheating, the word cheating implies that you're doing something against the rules, right? If it is in the rules that you're allowed to use a coach, it is not cheating. Straight up, that's not the correct word to use. If you could say unfair, you could say unfair, and that could be fine, right? But cheating's not right, because it would only be cheating if it's explicitly in the rules that you cannot be coached and you get coached anyway, right? That would be cheating. But I get what he's getting at here. He believes that, a big part of the back and forth with fighting games is the 1v1 interaction, the adaptation to your opponent and their adaptations to you. And he feels like adding extra parties, especially those that are outside, that are outside of the actual set being played, kind of takes away or undermines the situation. Which, there's validity to that. There's validity to it, but I think there's a lot more we need to go over. So this has actually been something that's been talked about by quite a lot of players at this point. Speed Kicks has been a pretty big champion against coaching. In particular, he's gone on record to make a bunch of different tweets and a bunch of different takes about, coaching shouldn't be allowed, this or that. So we have a bunch of stuff from him. We have some other players from outside of Tekken, even though Reinhardt has been involved with Tekken before, but he goes on record saying, talking about pretty good coaches. Real coaching is unique. So I think this was interesting to add just because he's right. And I also think he's right about, like, coaching can be negative in some ways. I think that's something that not a lot of people really speak on. But yeah, no, he's right to that regard. Also, thank you for the tier 3, Isaac. Thank you, bro. So he's right about that. And then we got Spag that is talking about midset coaching will not be allowed at the upcoming Red Bull event. Well, this is a big deal, right? This is a big deal. We're going to talk about why. So coaching, what these players are actually talking about in this situation is explicitly mid-set coaching, right? No one has an issue with, before a set or after a set, you talking to your friend or a training partner or something to talk about your upcoming matchup, discuss strategy, all that stuff is fine. What we're actually talking about in this particular situation is exactly during the set, while the set is being played, so before it is over. And there are some caveats with a lot of the ways that people have been attacking this particular issue. So the strongest arguments that I see for coaching, that I've seen people put out, because there's been a lot of common arguments here and there about it, right? The most important one that I see is, or the most common one that I see, is that it's present in sports, and so we should let it rock. I think that this is a pretty dumb argument. Honestly, I think this is a pretty dumb argument. Yes, there are 1v1 sports like boxing and MMA, which do have, mandated coaching. They have an entire camp of people that'll talk to you while it's going on and all that, right? But that is not fighting games, right? And it's okay that people are like trying to draw parallels and this and that. but there are very stark contrasts between, you know, IRL sports like contact sports and like a digital sport like fighting games. The main difference being like there are two parts of physical sports. Like when you're a boxer or you're fighting in MMA, right? There's two parts. There's the physical aspect and there's the mental aspect, right? Fighting games are overwhelming majority. It's mostly mental, right? Like there are physical, like yeah, sure, like some things are hard to execute here and there, but like the physical barrier is almost non-existent. Almost. I'm not gonna diminish how difficult sometimes things are for disabled gamers and this and that. They're definitely there, but it's significantly reduced. So an overwhelming majority of fighting game is mental, right? It is about mental. It's about keeping your mental up, about making those adaptations, about responding to your opponent's strategies, right? It doesn't have that physical aspect. And so I would argue that coaching is less impactful during the event in contact sports than it is during fighting games. I think it is more impactful in fighting games, which is why it's fine to have this conversation on whether it should be legal or not, despite it being present in those other things, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing, it's better gameplay, and better gameplay means that it's better for spectators. This is just true. This is true, right? This is something that we can't really get past, right? When you're a spectator, right? When you're watching a sport or you're watching anything, you're watching any type of entertainment that is revolved around competition, you want to see the best players play their best, right? I don't think anyone would argue with that. We want to see people to perform at the highest level and all that, right? And coaching does help that. It does help that because people are going to not only be relying on their own skills that they've built up over this and that, but they're also going to have that conversation that'll allow them to make micro adjustments, and we're going to see more of that back and forth happen because of that. And so it does lead to higher level gameplay. Now, whether that is a worthy trade-off or not is completely up to, you know, each individual person, but it does lead to better gameplay. And I would think people would be hard pressed. They would be hard pressed to argue with that one, right? Another argument for coaching being a sustainable avenue for fighting gamers. This is actually like one that I think is way more important than a lot of the BS that people have been spouting. Like, I think that like being a coach in fighting games, it would be nice if that was like something that people could realistically rely on. Like if there were people that could get picked up by teams as coaches alone and be paid salaries to be a coach, I think that opens up more opportunities for people in fighting games, and more opportunity is always better, right? Yes, being a player and all that is great, but like we would love for there to be more positions for people to get involved with the fighting game community and it be sustainable, right? And coaching is one of those things that would be really cool. Case in point, right? Team Liquid, way back when, picked up Crunch. Crunch was a pretty solid melee player, but his claim to fame was being Hungrybox's coach, right? And his coaching was a big part of why Hungrybox was able to win EVO in 2016. It was a really, really big deal. Liquid actually picked up and they paid this man a salary to coach Hungrybox, right? That's a big deal. If this starts happening more in the fighting game community at large, this is huge for the ecosystem, right? Because suddenly it's not only being a top player that is the avenue you have to go in order to like do it for a living, right? If you could be a coach, or you could be an analyst, or you could be a, you know, this or that, something outside of being a player or a commentator, then, you know, that's really good for us. That's really good for us in the long run. And I do think it's something that's to be considered. And so, yeah, I think those are like the main arguments for. So let's talk about the arguments against. So the first one is that fighting games are particularly special because it's 1v1, right? And so that's kind of like what Yagami was getting at. I don't think people ever really have an issue with I've never seen anyone have an issue with like team esports having coaching. Like I've never seen someone say like, oh, Dota players or Counter-Strike players or Valorant players. I've never heard someone speak out against coaching in those games. So I think they're trying to make the case that, you know, because fighting games have this unique identity of being one player versus one player, you know, this takes away from it, and it kind of tarnishes the sanctity of competition. Not going to agree or disagree, but it is an argument. Absolutely. Next one, adaptation is a skill that should be tested. So this is one that I really do agree with. I think like when you're playing a set in tournament in a fighting game, right? The reason that we have set up tournaments to exist in the way that they do, one of the reasons is to test people's adaptation, right? So some people would argue, you know, why isn't every game first to 3, right? This is something that comes up. Why isn't every game just first to 3 all the time? Well, one, because of time, logistically, that's just a nightmare. But the other thing is that first to 2s actually have like a good value, right? Like you do have, there is value in a shorter set, right? It tests how quickly you can make those adaptations, how quickly you can recognize the patterns, how quickly you can make those adjustments on the fly. That is something that we hold valuable in fighting games and is tested. And so like it does indeed take away from that. Like first to 2, right, would be severely undermined in the situation where you go down game 1 and then someone tells you all the things, or they tell you all the things that your opponent was doing, this or that, how to counter them. Now keep in mind, usually coaching sessions, they're like pretty short. Most of the time they're like 60 seconds at most, but you get the idea, right? Like it kind of takes away from, it puts less of the necessity of adaptation on the player itself, right? It offloads some of that responsibility, which is something that should be talked about. Absolutely. What else? Big thing, maybe the biggest thing, it disrupts the tournament flow. And I think that this is actually the strongest argument against coaching right now, is that it slows down events and it's disruptive in some ways, right? Because, you know, the way that coaching exists now, it's most cases it's allowed to be 60 seconds between games, right? And so after every single game of Tekken is played, someone is going up on stage and talking for a minute, and then they're playing the next game, and then they're talking for a minute, and then they're going to the next game, right? It disrupts the tournament flow, not only for TOs, right? Because it makes all of your run of show slower. Like your top 8s are just going to take way longer because everyone is taking a full minute of coaching between every single game. That adds up. A lot of games are played over the course of a tournament, right? It could take a really long time. The other thing is that, you know, what about the inequality, right? What if it's someone that has a coach versus someone that doesn't have a coach? What if someone just wants to, you know, load into the next game immediately, they're hot and they're ready to go, right? And they don't want to disrupt their momentum or anything. It's like, it can be icing in some ways, right? Because you're forced to wait there. And a minute isn't a super long time by any means, but there are some people that are like that, right? They want to keep the flow going. They don't want any distractions. They don't want anyone to slow them down. And so I think that matters for sure when we have this coaching conversation, whether it's you know, legal or not, or should be legal or not. I think mostly comes down to a matter of opinion. I actually think that there isn't a clear-cut answer here. I think there's pretty good arguments for it being legal. There are pretty good arguments for it being illegal, but I think the most important thing from both sides is that it needs to be consistent. I think a real big issue with fighting games right now is that we have a bunch of different rule sets. For example, Tekken World Tour allows coaching, but like this event, right, that is being run on Red Bull, they're banning coaching, right? And so like this is like pretty this is not great, right? You no matter what the scene comes to a decision on, whether they decide to let coaching be legal or not, I think it is important that the rule sets are the same, right? Wherever like coaching is not legal, it should just be not legal across the board. If it is legal, it should be legal across the board, because that consistency and rule set matters, right? There's a reason that everyone usually adheres to certain rule sets when it comes to certain games. For most part, Tekken World Tour, Tekken events follow Tekken World Tour's rules. Why is that? For consistency. We don't want everyone to be playing tournaments with these crazy ass rules and then they show up to a Tekken World Tour event and it's culture shock. It's just bad, right? It's just bad for everyone overall. And so I just want consistent rule sets. So I actually think while Spag is taking a stand here, I'm not sure if he's the one that's making the rule set for the event itself. I think it's actually like pretty bad to ban coaching here, simply because it's allowed everywhere else, right? Whenever the next Tekken World Tour comes around, if we want to have the conversation of whether coaching should be banned, right, we can have that conversation before the tour starts. But the tour is already going on, right? and the best players are already spending a bunch to travel and doing all of this and that, I think it is most important to just be consistent, right? We can have arguments over what should or should not be. We should be focused on what is and is not, right? It's not about hypotheticals. Let's just keep things consistent, and we'll worry about whether the rule set should be changed later, right? Unless it's a rule that's like super omega egregious to the point where it invalidates everything. And I don't think this coaching thing is, so I don't think we're at that point, right? Okay. Aside from consistency, I think there's also a middle ground, right? I think that the severity of disruption on coaching is probably one of the reasons that people have been led to have such strong takes on it, right? Which is important. So like, for example, I think if coaching can be legal, in my opinion, it can be legal. However, I actually think it should only be once per set, instead of once per game, right? That makes it way less disruptive, right? And also most coaching for a minute, if you only have a minute for the entire set, right? Then that means you have to really plan when the coaching happens, right? Because if you burn it after you lose the first game, you're playing your first 3, you're not gonna have that for the rest of the time. You still have to do it on your own, right? You still have to make those adjustments yourself. And I think that would be much healthier and also much faster. It's way less disruptive to everyone. And I would love to see them make that change eventually, even if they wanted to do once per set and it was a minute and a half instead of 60 seconds. I think that would be fine. I think that would be okay. You're still allowing for people to do it. It's just it's going to be less impactful overall to the gameplay, and also less impactful to, you know, run of show and everything. So I think that's one thing. There's more to coaching than just like giving scoops, right? I think that some people have this understanding with coaching that it's you're losing and then some top player comes and whispers you the secret keys to winning, and then you automatically win. That's not how it goes most of the time. I will tell you that an overwhelming majority of coaching, especially mid-set coaching, is about keeping the player grounded more so than telling them, hey, this move, he really biases towards this move, right? Like sometimes they can be that, like, hey, you're getting hit by a lot of this. But I would tell you most of the time what helps even more is someone walking up to you and saying, yo, just stay relaxed, right? You're playing too antsy, you're going too fast, right? You're getting ahead of yourself, or you're not taking initiative enough, you're playing too slow, you need to get in his face a little bit. Well, stuff like that matters way more than like, oh my god, don't forget that that this move is -12 and so you can't do this or that, right? You just don't have time to talk about the intricacies of frame data in most cases during a short coaching session, right? It's way more about the mental, right? And sometimes that's all people need, right? Sometimes that's all people need. Sometimes all they need is a tap on the shoulder and their friend telling them, yo, just relax. You're already really good. Just play your game, right? That makes a world of difference. I've seen people win sets like that before. There was no explicit, any crazy things done. It was just them being reminded that, yo, you got here for a reason. Just stay calm. And then they won. Like, it's just like that sometimes, right? Could they have done it on their own? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Would they have done it on their own? Depends on the person, right? And I think that's probably why it feels so nebulous to people, because it's like kind of up in the air in a lot of cases. And then the equality thing, right? So not only do I think coaching should be consistent, I think there should be a clause, maybe. This might be a hot take. I think there should be a clause. I think we allow coaching. It's once per set. On a first to 3 we could extend it, so like maybe during a first to 2 you get once per set and it's 60 seconds. During a first to 3 you get once per set, it's like, you know, 75 seconds or something. It's a little bit longer for a first to 3, right? But on top of that, I think that there should be a way for players to opt out, if that makes sense, right? If you are someone that is going to a tournament and you're playing in, like, you know, top 48 or top 32 or whatever, I would say like make this out of pools, maybe, just because like in pools it would be kind of hard to enforce. It would be kind of hard to enforce just because there's so many people playing. But like maybe if you did this out of pools where like coaching is only allowed if both players agree, right? I think that would be interesting, right? Because then most of the time you're only going to get coaching in sets where both players have a coach, right? And I think that inequality of one player having a coach and one player not is like what makes some people feel so bad about the way things are now. But if you make it so like both players have to agree for there to be coaching, then it's like consent, right? Like everyone is okay with it, so it's cool, right? It prevents people from getting slowed down if they don't want to get slowed down. But it also opens the opportunity for people to change their minds, right? Like, so you might not want coaching earlier on in the tournament, but maybe you do later, and that's okay. We can just ask both players before they start playing, and then you go from there. And I think that would be interesting to experiment with. But this coaching thing is going to continue to. It's gonna probably, like, this topic is gonna keep coming up until pretty much next Tekken World Tour. Because like I said, Tekken's like the only game that really like has conversations like this about this particular topic on a wider scale. And so I'm curious to see how this will impact the next rule set. But yeah, that's kind of my spiel on this whole coaching thing. Curious as to what you guys think about the whole thing, whether it should be legal, illegal, if you think there's caveats, if you think there's like special rules we should be implementing. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. If you enjoyed the talk, you can leave a like and a comment, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.